This is the story of the Pascagoula, one of the last significant rivers in the United States free to flood and recede with the seasons. It is hard to believe almost all other rivers in the country have been altered to one degree or another. But here in the Pascagoula Basin is the largest river remaining, still possessing all of its majesty, all of its beauty, force, and fragility, its waters flowing with the rhythms of nature. Thunderclouds rise on the horizon. Water evaporates from the Gulf of Mexico and then falls back as rain along the banks of the Pascagoula. Rain, then flood, and then the waters recede. It is a part of a vast life cycle. After several days of hard rain, the river overflows its banks. There are no levees on the Pascagoula. It's free to flood, unobstructed throughout the forest bottomlands. This flooding is a key to the natural cycle of the river. For human habitation, flooding can be devastating. But for a natural ecosystem, it is life-giving. This rain has given biologist Dan Smith a perfect opportunity to evaluate the role of floods in the Pascagoula.
One of the unique things about this river is it is a river that is relatively natural in terms of its flooding regime. That's unique in a sense in much of these kinds of rivers because many of them have been altered through engineering practices, either levees built that essentially isolate this back swamp from the river channel, or the channel in some cases may be cut deeper, and that when you cut the channel deeper, the floods don't get out of bank and don't come back into the river. The trees that we see around here, the cypress, the tupelo, the swamp white oak, are all species that are adapted to living in conditions where water is present for a good portion of the year. What happens if you alter this river, and what's happened to many rivers in the United States, is the river channel is cut off, decoupled essentially from the back swamp, either through development of levees, through channelization and deepening of the main channel. What happens is that cuts off the back swamp, and it no longer receives an annual flood which is very important in maintaining these systems, not only in terms of the species that occur here, but in terms of the import and export of nutrients that are associated with that flooding regime, the capability of fish and other species to actually move into the floodplain, the back swamp, and spawn at certain times of the year. Many processes that take place in this back swamp system are intricately and intimately tied with this annual flooding regime. You take that flooding regime away, and this system changes totally.
Forest, wetlands, and wildlife all depend on this natural flooding cycle. In a matter of days, the river level drops significantly, allowing botanist Will McDermott to investigate one of the many sandbars that was, just a week ago, under several feet of water.
The ecosystems depend crucially on cycles of flooding, from winter rains, spring overflow, and down into the bottomland hardwood forest, because during a flood cycle, what's currently land right now, dry land in a bottomland hardwood forest, when it's flooded, is literally the bottom of the river.
A naturally flowing river like the Pascagoula is constantly changing course. The landscape along its banks can fluctuate dramatically with the rising and falling river. The river itself moves from place to place, creating new oxbow lakes, places that were once a part of the river but now are cut off.
These southern low-gradient rivers have, for thousands of years, migrated back and forth across the floodplain. That's how they equalize their energy through a series of meanders, and that's what forms all these oxbows that we see out here in the floodplain. It's the old river channels. Basically, people talk about rivers eroding and going back and forth. Lateral erosion is very natural in these floodplains. But here you can see real good a natural meander and the migration of the river as it moves over this way to the west. And on the east side there, it's depositing land, so no land's really being lost.
What Hartfield is describing is key to the Pascagoula's ecosystem. Its meandering course keeps its water relatively slow flowing. This keeps the river from scouring out a deep channel that characterizes faster water. Faster water means that the river does not nourish the wetlands and swamps, bayous and forest. The Pascagoula is remarkable because it flows naturally, at its own speed, and with the freedom to roam at will. The Pascagoula's waters are nourished from hundreds of tributaries that flow from the Mississippi Hills down into the Chickasawhay and Leaf rivers. Where those rivers converge, the Pascagoula begins. This convergence of many channels flowing down from an expanse of elevated land towards a large body of water is referred to as a watershed. It is a terrific life-creating engine. A large part of the southeastern United States is just such a watershed. The Pascagoula watershed, made up of many streams, oxbow lakes, springs, freshwater swamps, bayous, and saltwater marshes, is one of the many that drain the central region of the country into the Gulf of Mexico. There is an enormous exchange of energy that takes place that results in the region being the most biologically diverse in the country.
Well, here in the Pascagoula River system in the bottomland hardwood forest, you see a very complex structural system. These species are broad-leaved and they're deciduous, and the forest is vertically stratified. We have an upper canopy, we have trees and a subcanopy beneath that, we have saplings growing up and emerging into the canopy, and we have a shrub layer beneath it. It's a very complex forest in comparison to, say, a northern, much more colder boreal forest, where there may just be 2 or 3 species of pine or spruce, and the forest is very open in the understory. These types of structurally complex forests are similar in some regards to the subtropical and tropical regions. You can still come in the Pascagoula River system here today and see the structural broadleaf complexity that people like Audubon saw in the early days.
John James Audubon was just one of many naturalists to explore the Pascagoula. This unique ecosystem continues to draw artists, environmentalists, and scientists alike.
The Pascagoula, the basin at large, really the southeastern quadrant of the state, is home to more than 300 species of birds that have been documented all during the year. Some are just passing through and some are here all year, and some come here from the tropics and nest and go back.
That one? Yes.
I think that's a great crested flycatcher.
Bruce Reed,
Which
an
tree?
avid bird enthusiast, leads tours into the Pascagoula to study the crucial role the river plays for migrating birds.
It really is a place that is of great importance to about 80% of the bird life that occurs in Mississippi. There are birds in all different types of habitats, from the bottomland forest we're in now to the longleaf pine ridges to the more upland forests and the actual river bottom itself. Pascagoula River is really like an interstate highway for migratory birds. It's a large throughway with a large block of forest running north and south. And this time of year in the spring are coming off of a long, difficult flight over the Gulf of Mexico, 20 hours, 600 miles. They need a place to stop and land, feed, and then go on, all the way up to the northern reaches of North America. It needs to be a safe and efficient highway, just like a road needs to be maintained. And basically we have an 80-mile-long forest, and we can see the birds using that forest on radar, which is radar can detect migratory birds just like raindrops. And we can see a tremendous image of intensity of birds using the Pascagoula River at different times of the year.
The Pascagoula has risen dramatically following a tropical storm. Despite the treacherous waters, Charles Duncan and a group of scientists search for birds that have migrated to these wetlands from the northern regions of the United States and Canada.
Over about the last 20 years, scientists have realized that there are a number of migratory birds that are at risk, where we see population declines. And at first that was blamed on acid rain and habitat loss in the northern forest. And then as people turned their attention to Latin America, there was worry about destruction of rainforest. But our current understanding realizes that the places in between, the places that birds need to rest on migration, may be as critical to their survival as some of these other places. These places like the Pascagoula, these huge, beautiful bottomland hardwoods, that a migratory bird that may have bred in my state of Maine needs on its way to its wintering grounds. It's never been here before, it's never seen this place, but it crucially needs to gather food and resources so that it can continue its migration, both this time of year as it moves south in autumn and in the spring as it moves north toward the breeding ground in spring.